Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. I didn't know how to explain this, but stepping into that flimsy silk dress and pantyhose, my body finally stopped feeling like a stranger's. That moment, Marvin died. This isn't a story about a freak, but how a forced disguise became the truest reflection of my soul. I sat slumped on the cold, scuffed hardwood floor of my apartment, staring blankly at the two pieces of paper that effectively summarized my pathetic existence. In my left hand, a glaring neon pink eviction notice. In my right, a printout from the ATM, boldly displaying an account balance of $14.32. I was 26, jobless, and completely out of options. That was the exact moment the universe decided to kick the door open, literally. Charlie didn't bother knocking. He just barged into my apartment with all the slick, unearned confidence of a black market recruiter who thrived on the desperation of others. "Look at you, Marvin, tragic, absolutely tragic," Charlie sneered, kicking an empty takeout box out of his way. Before I could muster the energy to tell him to get out, he tossed a sleek, matte black folder onto my rickety coffee table. Right beside it, he placed something that made my stomach drop. A medium-sized, peach-pink suitcase. "What in the absolute name of insanity is this, Charlie?" I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Your salvation," he replied, flashing a predatory grin. "I found you a job, 6 figures, full benefits. It's a creative director position at Femme Fatale, the biggest up-and-coming design conglomerate in the city." I blinked, momentarily forgetting my misery. Femme Fatale, wait, isn't that the place that made headlines last month? "They only hire women." "Exactly," Charlie said, tapping the black folder. "Which is why Marvin isn't applying. Miriam is." My breath hitched. I stared at him, then at the pink suitcase, waiting for the punchline. But Charlie wasn't laughing. He was dead serious. He leaned down, popping the latches of the suitcase with a sharp double click. "The deal is simple," Charlie stated, his voice dropping into a strictly business tone. I forged the background, the references, the entire identity. "I get you past the initial HR firewall. In exchange, I take 50% of your paycheck every month. Half a loaf is better than starving on the street, right?" "You want me to cross-dress," I sputtered, the sheer absurdity of the situation finally hitting me. "Are you out of your mind? I'm a man. I'm a 6-foot-tall, broad-shouldered man." "You're a man who is about to be homeless by Tuesday," Charlie countered smoothly. "Now, get up. We have a lot of work to do." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw him out of my apartment. But the pink eviction notice in my hand felt heavier than lead. I had no one to call, no family willing to spot me a dime. It was this or the streets. Swallowing the bitterest pill of my life, I stood up. Charlie didn't waste a second. "Take off the shirt, Marvin, the baggy jeans, too, all of it." With trembling hands, I pulled my worn-out, rough cotton t-shirt over my head and tossed it onto the sofa. Next went my jeans. I stood there shivering in my boxers, feeling incredibly exposed and vulnerable. Charlie reached into the peach suitcase and pulled out a handful of sheer, black fabric. He shoved it against my chest. "Put it on, from the bottom up. We need to build the foundation." I looked down at my hands. It was a set of delicate, sheer black lace lingerie. The fabric was so thin, so fragile. It felt like it might tear if I breathed on it too hard. A profound wave of humiliation washed over me. "Charlie, I can't. This is ridiculous." "Oh, for crying out loud, look at this thing," I groaned, holding up the tiny lace panties. "Put it on or pack your bags for the homeless shelter. Your choice." Gritting my teeth, I stepped out of my boxers. Slowly, clumsily, I pulled the black lace panties up my legs. The sensation was immediate and shockingly alien. The delicate lace scratched against the rough, coarse skin of my thighs. As I pulled the elastic waistband over my hips, it bound me tightly. It was painfully restrictive, compressing my anatomy in a way that made me completely unable to sit or stand still. I shifted my weight from foot to foot, my face burning with a fiery shame. Next came the chest. Charlie handed me a complex, underwired brassiere, followed by 2 heavy silicone teardrops. "Slip these into the pockets of the bra," he instructed. I fumbled with the straps, hooking the garment behind my back. As the heavy silicone form settled against my chest, a bizarre sensation overtook me. It wasn't just the physical weight pressing down on my ribs. It was a psychological anchor. The heavy silicone pushed down on my lungs, forcing me to breathe a little shallower. Altering my center of gravity, I felt a phantom presence on my chest. A surreal, constructed silhouette that didn't belong to me, yet clung to me like a second skin. "Now the dress," Charlie commanded, and he handed me an olive-brown bodycon dress. The material was thick and elastic. I raised my arms, pulling it down over the silicone chest, dragging it over my waist and down to my thighs. The fabric grabbed onto every contour of my body. It didn't drape, it squeezed. It demanded absolute awareness of my posture. If I slouched, the fabric wrinkled terribly. If I didn't keep my core tight, my flat, masculine waist looked utterly out of place. I felt trapped in a silken cage. Every movement was restricted. The lace scratched, the bra dug into my shoulders, and the tight dress confined my stride. "Still," Charlie said, tossing a pair of chunky black boots at my feet. "Put those on." I tried to bend over, but the tight dress rode dangerously high up my thighs. I had to awkwardly angle my knees, wiggling my feet into the heavy, thick-soled boots. The moment I stood up, the added 2 inches of heel forced my calves to flex, pushing my pelvis slightly forward. Finally, Charlie slid a pair of oversized, dark tortoise-shell sunglasses onto my face. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the cheap, cracked full-length mirror leaning against my bedroom wall. I turned my head, my breath caught in my throat. I fully expected to see a monster, a twisted, bearded clown wearing women's clothing as a sick joke. But the oversized sunglasses covered the harsh angles of my brow and cheekbones. The heavy silicone filled out the top of the dress perfectly, drawing the eye away from my broad shoulders. The chunky boots grounded the outfit, making my legs look surprisingly proportional, even slender in the dark fabric of the dress. It was a distortion, a terrifyingly effective illusion. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, trapped beneath the heavy silicone and underwire. Anger, despair, and an indescribable panic warred in my mind. Who was that in the mirror? It wasn't Marvin. Marvin was a failure, a guy who couldn't pay his rent, a man who had hit rock bottom. The figure in the mirror, despite my internal screaming, looked composed, guarded. Charlie slapped a pen onto the coffee table, right next to a printed contract. 50%, Marvin, you sign this and I give you the life of Miriam. Wealth, security, a roof over your head. You don't, and I walk out that door with the suitcase. I stood there in the chunky boots, feeling the lace digging into my hips, the dress suffocating my masculine pride. I closed my eyes behind the dark sunglasses. The fabric smelled new, synthetic, and completely terrifying. I walked over to the table. Every step felt strange, constrained, yet purposeful. I picked up the pen. With a trembling hand, I signed the document. Marvin's fate was sealed in black ink. Traded away for a pair of silicone forms and a silk cage. The next 3 days were a blur of humiliating, agonizing transformations. Charlie wasn't just a black market recruiter. He was a ruthless director, putting on the most high-stakes play of his life. To ensure I didn't immediately shatter the illusion, he brought in Zoe, a freelance stylist and makeup artist who looked at my face with the cold, calculating eyes of an architect staring at a dilapidated building. "We need to soften everything," Zoe had muttered on her first day, wielding a pair of tweezers like surgical instruments. By the 3rd afternoon, Zoe decided it was time to move beyond the heavy, forgiving fabrics Charlie had initially provided. She stood before me in my living room, holding 2 items that made my throat instantly go dry: a shimmering sequined mini-skirt and a sheer cream-colored silk halter top. "Oh, sweet, merciful heavens. Zoe, no," I pleaded, crossing my arms over my chest. "That top barely covers anything. My shoulders are too broad. I'll look like a linebacker in a napkin." "Trust the process, Marvin." Zoe sighed, entirely unfazed by my panic. "The halter neckline cuts inward. It actually creates an optical illusion that narrows the shoulders. And the skirt brings the attention down to your legs. Now sit on the edge of the bed. We need to start with the hosiery. She tossed a small plastic-wrapped square onto my lap. Pantyhose, sheer, new detuned pantyhose. I had never held a pair in my life. Opening the package, the nylon felt weightless, like spun spider webs. Following Zoe's exasperated instructions, I bunched one leg of the nylon down to the toe and slipped my foot inside. The sensation was profoundly alien. As I unrolled the thin fabric over my ankle, up my calf, and over my knee, I felt a continuous, elastic pressure squeezing my flesh. It wasn't like wearing pants. It felt as if my leg had been dipped into a pool of shrink wrap. I repeated the process with the other leg, finally standing up to pull the sheer nylon tightly over my hips and waist. The pantyhose gripped my lower half in a relentless, smoothing hug. It was a suffocating, tiny prison, yet oddly securing. It held everything fiercely in place, reminding me with every single step that I was entirely bound. Then came the cream halter top. As I slipped it on and Zoe tied the thin ribbons behind my neck, I shivered. The silk was dangerously smooth, gliding against my skin like cool water. Every time I breathed, the delicate fabric shifted, tickling my collarbones and ribs. It left my back completely bare, making me feel hyper-aware of the air in the room. I felt terribly fragile. Finally, I stepped into the sequin skirt, which hugged my nylon-clad hips tightly, and slid my feet into a pair of slender black heels. Not chunky boots this time, real heels. "All right," Charlie said, emerging from the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Time for the field test." "The what?" I yelped, my newly practiced, softer vocal register slipping back into a panic-stricken baritone. "I can't go outside. I can barely stand without my ankles quivering. If you can't walk down to the corner store and buy a bottle of water without being clocked, you'll never survive a corporate interview," Charlie said flatly. "Zer did your hair and makeup perfectly. The wig looks natural. Put on the sunglasses and go." Before I could mount a proper defense, Charlie essentially shoved me out of my own apartment door. The hallway felt 10 miles long. Every step was a calculated equation of balance, weight distribution, and sheer terror. The heels clicked loudly against the linoleum, a spotlight announcing my presence to anyone within earshot. My heart hammered wildly against the heavy silicone forms on my chest. They're going to know the moment anyone looks at me. They're going to scream, laugh, or punch me in the face. I pushed open the heavy front doors of my building and stepped out onto the bustling afternoon sidewalk. The sunlight hit me, and a gust of wind caught the bottom of my sequin skirt, brushing the thin silk of my top. Without thinking, I pressed a hand to my collarbone, shrinking into myself. I kept my head down, hidden behind the oversized sunglasses, praying for invisibility. I took 3 awkward, wobbly steps down the pavement. I was so focused on not twisting my ankle that I didn't see the man in the gray suit hurrying out of the adjacent coffee shop. We collided. "Oh, goodness gracious," I gasped, the impact knocking me entirely off my center of gravity. My stiletto caught in a crack in the pavement. I flailed my arms, fully expecting to crash onto the hard concrete, bracing for the inevitable scraped knees and public humiliation. But the fall never came. 2 strong hands shot out, gripping me firmly by the waist. The stranger halted my momentum instantly. His large hands pressed against the sequins of my skirt, his thumbs resting just above my hips where the pantyhose cinched me tight. "Whoa there, I've got you," a deep, warm voice said. I froze, paralyzed with absolute terror. My breathing stopped. This is it, I thought. He's touching me. He's going to feel that I'm solid, that I'm a man. He's going to shove me away in disgust. The stranger pulled me upright, steadying me gently. He didn't pull away. Instead, his eyes darted down to ensure I had regained my footing. I watched his gaze sweep over my long legs, wrapped smoothly in the sheer pantyhose, before tracing back up to my face. I didn't scowl. He didn't recoil. His eyes, crinkling with genuine concern and a polite hint of admiration, met mine through the tinted lenses of my glasses. "I am so terribly sorry," he said, his voice lowering into a gentle, protective timbre. He slowly released his grip on my waist, making sure I was balanced. "Are you all right? Miss, I was completely blind there for a second." Please tell me you didn't twist an ankle. Miss? The word struck my chest like a bolt of lightning, sending an electric shockwave all the way down to my toes. He hadn't seen a desperate man in a costume. He saw a clumsy, vulnerable woman. And more importantly, he treated her with a tender, chivalrous care that Marvin, a struggling, invisible guy, had never experienced in his entire 26 years on Earth. As a man, if I bumped into someone, I'd get a grunt, a scowl, or a curse. But as Miriam, I was caught. I was asked if I was okay. I'm quite all right. Thank you, I whispered, my voice naturally softening, colored by a genuine, breathy flutter of shock. The man smiled warmly, gave a polite nod, and stepped aside to let me pass. Have a wonderful day, miss. Be careful on those heels. I don't remember buying the bottle of water. I floated through the convenience store in a daze, the ghost of his hand still warm against my waist. The intense panic that had gripped my spine had miraculously evaporated. When I finally returned to the apartment, Charlie and Zoe were already packing up their things for the day. Satisfied that I hadn't been arrested or chased through the streets, I locked the door behind them and leaned my back against the wood, clutching the plastic water bottle to my chest. The apartment was silent. I slowly walked into the bedroom and stood before the full-length mirror. I took off the oversized sunglasses, letting them drop onto the bed. I looked at the person staring back at me. Zoe's makeup had completely reshaped my eyes, making them look larger, softer, framed by sweeping lashes. The cream silk halter top clung elegantly to the silicone curves, making my upper body look delicate and poised. I reached up, my fingertips lightly brushing the smooth silk resting against my collarbone. It didn't feel like a ticklish, embarrassing joke anymore. I took a step backward, intentionally rolling my hips the way Zoe had shown me. The sequins on the skirt caught the bedroom light, glittering like liquid metal. My legs, smoothed and contoured by the restrictive pantyhose, looked incredibly sleek. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't see Charlie's puppet. I didn't see a pathetic contract. A bizarre, intoxicating warmth bloomed deep inside my ribcage, radiating outward and melting away years of masculine inadequacy. I spun on the heels much more gracefully this time and watched the silk flutter around me. I bit my lower lip, a small, genuine smile creeping onto my glossy, painted mouth. I wasn't parading in front of the mirror because I was forced to. I was doing it to see just how alluring I could truly be. And heaven help me, I actually felt beautiful. The morning of the interview, the air in my apartment felt crackling and thin, as if I were about to step out of an airplane without a parachute. Today was the day. It was do or die. Zoe had left me to my own devices for the final styling, a true test to see if her agonizing lessons had stuck. Standing before the mirror, I meticulously assembled my corporate armor. I started with a deeply structured, heavy-duty push-up bra. Just a week ago, the underwire had felt like an Iron Maiden, a torturous device designed to mock my biology. But today, as I settled the silicone forms into the cups and clasped it tight against my ribs, it didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a shield. It was the foundation that made the illusion impenetrable. I slipped on a rich, burgundy silk button-down blouse, tying a remarkably thin, black satin ribbon around the collar to act as a delicate necktie. The silk draped flawlessly over the synthetic curves of my chest. Next came the skirt, a black, pleated miniskirt that sat high on my natural waist, tightly cinching the sheer black tights that encased my legs. I zipped myself into a pair of knee-high, supple black leather boots. As I took my first few steps across the living room, swinging a designer red leather handbag onto my shoulder, a profound realization hit me. The outfit physically demanded elegance. The breeze brushing against the sheer tights beneath the short hemline of the skirt made me hyper-aware of my lower half. I couldn't take wide, masculine strides. The skirt would ride up instantly. Instead, I had to place one booted foot neatly in front of the other, my hips naturally swaying to accommodate the narrow path. I was entirely closed in, yet completely on display. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I walked out the door. Marvin didn't leave the apartment that morning. Miriam did. The headquarters of Femme Fatale was less a corporate building and more a fortress of high fashion. The lobby was a sprawling expanse of white marble and glass, smelling faintly of espresso and outrageously expensive floral perfumes. Every person walking through the atrium was an impeccably dressed woman. The staccato click-clack of dozens of high heels echoing off the marble sounded like a very intimidating chic army. "Miriam, for Victoria Hartley," I told the receptionist, actively pitching my voice into the melodic, breathy resonance Zoe and Charlie had drilled into me. "7th floor, she's expecting you." The receptionist smiled, not batting an eyelash. I let out a microscopic breath of relief. Pass number 1. The elevator doors opened to an executive suite that looked like the inside of a Vogue editorial. And sitting at the end of a long, terrifyingly clean glass table was the CEO herself. Victoria Hartley. She possessed a severe, architectural silver bob, wearing a tailored white suit that screamed power. She didn't look up when I walked in. She was busy flipping through the fake portfolio Charlie had painstakingly constructed. "Take a seat, Miriam," Victoria commanded, her voice smooth but lined with steel. I approached the chair, my knees trembling so violently I thought the leather of my boots would squeak. I sat down carefully, mindful of the mini-skirt. I pressed my knees together and gracefully crossed my ankles to the side, resting my hands neatly on my lap. It was a posture born out of sheer self-preservation, but it felt remarkably poised. For 3 agonizing minutes, the only sound was the rustling of my portfolio pages. I felt a bead of sweat threatening to ruin the foundation on my forehead. I gently raised a manicured hand, absent-mindedly tucking a long strand of my auburn wig behind my ear, a nervous tic I didn't even realize I had developed. Finally, Victoria closed the folder. She took off her reading glasses and locked her piercing blue eyes onto mine. "The designs in here are structurally brilliant, bold, aggressive lines," Victoria said, leaning forward and resting her chin on her steepled fingers. "Yet the fabric choices you dictate in these notes, the silks, the chiffons, they are incredibly vulnerable. It's a walking contradiction. Miriam, tell me, what drives this aesthetic? What is your actual philosophy?" My mind went entirely blank. Charlie hadn't prepped me for this. I had given me fake schools, fake references, and fake jobs. But he couldn't give me a fake soul to explain art I hadn't drawn. I stared into Victoria's eyes, and the panic began to curdle in my chest. If I tried to spin a corporate buzzword salad, this woman would see right through me and have security throw me onto the pavement. I had to give her something real. I swallowed hard. Without thinking, I stopped trying to channel some fictional prodigy and just answered from the darkest, most hidden corner of my own chest. "It's about survival," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling not from the vocal training but from raw emotion. People look at a strong silhouette, the sharp shoulders, the heavy leathers, the thick suits, and they assume the person inside is made of stone. They demand that you be tough, unyielding, and hard. I looked down at the soft, burgundy silk wrapping my chest, feeling the tight constriction of my bra, the vulnerability of my exposed legs in the cold corporate air. "But underneath all of that armor," I continued, looking back up at Victoria, "there is a desperate desire to be soft, to be delicate. The aggressive lines are just the fortress we build, so that the fragile, silken parts of ourselves aren't crushed by a world that refuses to understand them. My design philosophy is simply giving that hidden vulnerability a safe place to breathe." Silence hung in the room. It was thick, heavy, and terrifying. I had shown my hand. I had basically confessed to being a scared, delicate thing hiding inside a hardened shell. My heart hammered against my ribs. Good heavens, I've ruined it. She thinks I'm a pathetic mess. Victoria Hartley slowly sat back in her chair. The severe, intimidating lines of her face softened just a fraction of an inch. "The fashion industry is full of people who dress up their boldness, but lack a sensitive soul," Victoria murmured, her eyes studying my face with a new, profound intensity. "Your mindset is fiercely daring, yet your spirit is incredibly delicate." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a heavy metal stamper. With a loud, decisive thwack, she stamped a piece of paperwork on her desk. She then slid a small plastic rectangle across the glass table toward me. "Welcome to Femme Fatale. Miriam HR is on the 4th floor. Get your security photo taken." My breath hitched. I reached out, my fingers grazing the smooth plastic of the ID badge authorization form. "Thank you, Ms. Hartley," I breathed, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. When I finally walked out of the glass building and back onto the bustling city street, the midday sun hit my face. I stopped on the sidewalk, clutching the red leather handbag to my side. I looked down at my neat knee-high boots, the hem of my pleated skirt, and the sheer black tights. Charlie had given me the clothes, the fake name, and the fake resume. But he hadn't sat in that chair. He hadn't spoken those words. The woman who just landed a six-figure job at the most exclusive design firm in the city wasn't a product of a black market scam. For the first time, as the wind gently fluttered the burgundy silk against my collarbone, I realized the terrifying truth. I didn't just look the part. Today, Miriam had become real, and heaven help me, I didn't want to take this outfit off. 6 months is an agonizingly long time to hold your breath, to maintain the pristine, flawless illusion required by femme fatale, and to stop Charlie from breathing down my neck about the shadow on my jawline. He escalated his control. Makeup and close shaves were no longer enough to hide the rapid biology of a man in his mid-20s. Charlie tapped into his grim network and provided me with a steady, high-dose supply of black market estrogen and testosterone blockers. "Take the pills, Marvin," Charlie had hissed on a Tuesday evening, lighting a nondescript amber bottle across my coffee table. "Or you can try explaining to Victoria Hartley why her new star creative director has 5 o'clock shadow during a board meeting." Oh, I swallowed them day after day, week after week. At first, the changes were microscopic. A sudden sensitivity here, a strange emotional volatility there. But by the 6-month mark, my apartment had transformed. The last of Marvin's clothes, the scratchy denims, the shapeless hoodies, were stuffed in trash bags and left by the dumpster. My closet was a vivid, overflowing garden of silks, chiffons, velvets, and lace. It was the night of the femme fatale spring gala, when the biochemical reality of what I was doing finally, undeniably shattered my remaining defenses. I stood in my bathroom, preparing for the evening. I was slipping into a pale blush pink, floor-length slip dress. The fabric was essentially liquid silk, cut so impossibly thin it felt like wearing a sigh. I paired it with black fishnet stockings and a pair of wickedly sharp, strappy black stilettos that snake-thin leather laces up to my calves. As I pulled the delicate fabric over my head, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I stopped dead. The hormones had rewritten my architecture. The coarse, stubborn roughness of my skin had melted away, leaving behind an alarming, dewy softness. The thick, blocky muscle mass in my shoulders had thinned out entirely, while a terrifying, undeniable softness had gathered around my hips and thighs. But the most earth-shattering shift wasn't visible in the mirror, it was tactile. As I pulled up a pair of intricate, floral lace panties, an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. Months ago, women's underwear had felt like a suffocating, painful prison for my male anatomy. Now the constriction was gone. The pelvic discomfort had vanished completely. The testosterone blockers had caused things to shrink and shift so dramatically that the lace finally laid flat, cupping my form with an exquisite, comfortable intimacy. It was snug, warm, and horrifyingly perfect. I looked higher. I didn't need the heavy silicone forms Charlie had first given me. Beneath the thin blush silk of my dress, I wore a completely unlined, wire-free bralette. My own chest filled it. My budding breasts were small, incredibly tender, and ached constantly. A dull, throbbing pain that made me acutely aware of their existence with every step I took. Yet looking at the gentle swell pressing against the pink silk, a deep narcotic satisfaction bloomed in my stomach. I finished my makeup with a trembling hand, applying a coat of sheer gloss to my plumper, softer lips, and headed to the gala. The venue was an opulent, low-lit ballroom buzzing with champagne flutes and industry sharks. I glided through the room, the blush silk pooling around my fishnet-clad legs. Every step in the stilettos felt natural, swaying my center of gravity smoothly. I was smiling, laughing, playing the part of Miriam to absolute perfection. "You look absolutely mesmerizing tonight, Miriam." I turned. It was David, a handsome, notoriously charming lead designer from a rival firm. He had broad shoulders, a sharp jaw, and a gaze that felt entirely too heavy. I had been orbiting me all evening. "Oh, David, you're much too kind," I breathed, batting my eyelashes, a reflex that happened entirely without my conscious permission. David took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp edge of his masculinity. Before I could back away, he reached out and gently placed a large, warm hand on the curve of my waist. His fingers rested lightly against the thin blush silk. The impact was instantaneous. The heat radiating from his hand burned through the delicate fabric directly into my newly softened skin. It wasn't the startled, panic-stricken shock I felt months ago when the man caught me on the street. This was a profound, overwhelming wave of pure, electrical submission. A jolt of heat shot straight down my spine, pooling low in my stomach. The sheer physical presence of the man towering over me, holding my waist with such possessive, masculine ease, made my knees legitimately weak. My breath hitched in my throat, a tiny embarrassing gasp escaping my glossed lips. My newly tender breasts pressed subtly against the silk as I inadvertently leaned forward, drawn toward his warmth. Oh, good heavens, I thought, my mind reeling in absolute terror. I wasn't fighting it. Every single alarm bell in the logical, masculine part of my brain was screaming at me to push him away, to punch him, to assert my dominance. But my body, my estrogen-flooded, silk-draped body craved the exact opposite. I wanted to lean into his chest. I wanted his hand to grip my waist tighter. The sensation of being held, of being perceived as soft, beautiful, and desirable by a man, was intoxicating me to the point of blindness. David's thumb stroked the silk just above my hip bone. I shivered visibly, my eyelashes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. "Are you cold?" he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, stepping even closer. I think I just need some air," I stammered. My voice was a frantic, breathy whisper. I wrenched myself away from his grip, nearly tripping over the laces of my stilettos, and practically bolted for the grand balcony. I pushed the heavy glass doors open, stumbling out into the cool night air. I gripped the cold stone balustrade, gasping for breath as if I had been drowning. The cold wind whipped the blush silk around my fishnet-covered legs. I looked down at my shaking, manicured hands. I touched my aching chest, feeling the real, soft tissue beneath the bralette. Tears of sheer, unadulterated panic welled in my eyes, ruining my mascara. The medicine hadn't just smoothed my skin. The clothes weren't just a costume anymore. The boundary between Marvin and Miriam had completely dissolved. The man I thought I was, the desperate guy trying to pay rent, was entirely gone. He had evaporated the moment David touched my waist. I stood there in the dark, clutching the cold stone, weeping in a blush-pink dress. I had entirely, irreversibly lost my grip on manhood. And the most terrifying part of all, deep down, amidst the terror, I didn't want it back. The psychological fallout from the gala was a quiet, suffocating avalanche. For 3 days, I barely left my apartment. I paced the floorboards in oversized fluffy socks and a ridiculously soft cashmere sweater that hung loosely off my shoulders. Every time I passed the mirror, I flinched. The terror of the balcony, the realization that my reaction to David hadn't been an act, but a genuine biological surrender gnawed at my sanity. I felt like my mind was fracturing. I'm losing my mind. The pills are turning me into a freak. I'm a sick, twisted parody of a person. In a moment of sheer desperation, I bypassed Charlie entirely. I siphoned a substantial chunk of my Miriam salary into a secure account and tracked down Dr. Ann Evans, a highly discreet, ruthlessly expensive psychotherapist, known for handling executive-level breakdowns. "Fix me" were the first words out of my mouth when I sat down in her plush, softly lit office on a Tuesday afternoon. I was curled tightly into the corner of her leather sofa. I was wearing a thick, milky white turtleneck sweater dress and dark tights, defensively crossing my arms to hide the aching, undeniable swell of my chest. Dr. Evans, a calm woman in her 50s with observant, compassionate eyes, simply steepled her hands in her lap. Let's start by defining what is broken, Miriam, or should I call you Marvin? I broke down. The dam shattered. I sobbed ugly, breathless, chest-heaving sobs that ruined my meticulously applied foundation. I spilled everything. Charlie, the eviction, the pink suitcase, the black lace that had felt like a cage, the pills, the terrifying ecstasy of a man's hand on my silk-covered waist at the gala. I need you to reverse it, I begged, wiping a smear of mascara from my cheek with a trembling hand. Please tell me this is just a chemical imbalance. Tell me the estrogen poisoned my brain. Give me a prescription, a therapy routine, anything to make me feel like a normal man again. I can't live like this. I can't be this weak, pathetic, mixed-up thing. Dr. Evans didn't write anything down. She didn't look at me with pity or disgust. She just handed me a box of tissues. Marvin, she said gently, her voice carrying a comforting weight. I want you to think back, before Charlie, before the eviction. Have you never, not once in your entire life, felt this specific kind of peace before? I shook my head vigorously. No, I was a normal guy. I played sports. I drank beer. I was normal. Are you sure? She pressed, her tone unwavering. Close your eyes. Tell me about a time when you felt truly, deeply at ease with your body. Not proud, not strong, at peace. I closed my eyes, fresh tears hot against my eyelids. I dug past the misery of my 20s, past the awkward, painful overcompensation of my teenage years, plunging deep into the hazy archives of my childhood. Suddenly, a memory slammed into my mind with the force of a freight train. I was 7 years old. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My mother had gone to the grocery store, leaving me alone in the house. The hallway was quiet. I crept into her bedroom. The air smelled of old perfume and mothballs. I opened her wardrobe, mesmerized by a specific piece of clothing hanging in the corner. It was a slip dress, heavy, emerald green satin. In the memory, the little boy pulled his stiff, itchy corduroy pants and polo shirt off. With a heart pounding like a hummingbird's, he slipped the heavy, cool satin over his head. It dragged on the floor around his little feet. But as he stood in front of his mother's vanity mirror, he didn't feel like a spy or a thief. I felt beautiful. My adult voice whispered into the quiet of the therapy room. I opened my eyes, staring blankly at the wall, the memory playing out vividly. I twirled. The fabric flared out. It felt so incredibly safe, like I had finally put on the right skin. The memory suddenly darkened, turning violently sharp. Then the front door slammed. I choked out, my hands gripping the fabric of my white sweater dress so tightly my knuckles turned white. My dad came home early. He was drunk. He saw me in the mirror. He grabbed me by the back of the neck. My breathing turned ragged. I could feel the ghost of his heavy, calloused hand on my skin. I could hear his booming, slurred voice echoing in my skull. "What is wrong with you?" he had screamed, ripping the green satin over my head, nearly taking my ears off. "You're a boy, you hear me. You're a sick, twisted little boy. Don't you ever let me catch you in this filthy garbage again." He had beaten me until my ribs ached and my nose bled onto the carpet. In Dr. Evans' office, I clamped my hands over my mouth, stifling a wail. I buried it. I sobbed into my palms. I buried it so deep. I tried so hard to be the man he beat into me. I pushed my shoulders out. I dropped my voice. I tried. Dr. Evans, I tried so hard to be Marvin. Dr. Evans stood up. She walked over to the sofa and gently placed her hand over mine. Her touch was profoundly grounding. "Look at me," she said softly. I lowered my hands. My chest was heaving beneath the white sweater. "Charlie is a criminal, and he forced you into a horrific situation for money," Dr. Evans stated clearly. "And the pills he gave you changed the chemical makeup of your physical body. But Charlie did not create Miriam." She squeezed my trembling hand. "The pills didn't invent that feeling on the balcony. They didn't invent the 7-year-old girl in the green satin dress. That feeling, those emotions, that vulnerability, it has been sitting inside you for 25 years, trapped beneath the bruises your father left and the armor of Marvin you built to survive." I stared at her, the words washing over me like cold, clarifying water. Miriam is not a disease, sweetie, she smiled softly. Miriam is not a side effect. You aren't a broken man. You were just a girl forced to wear a suffocating, terrible male disguise for a very long time. And Charlie, in his twisted greed, simply handed you the key to your own cage. The silence in the room stretched out, no longer heavy, but filled with an incredible, terrifying lightness. I looked down at my hands. The nails were neatly manicured. I felt the soft wool of the sweater dress clinging to the natural, tender curves of my chest. I felt the snug, comforting grip of the tights against my thighs. For 25 years, I had believed that the green satin dress was the costume. I had believed my father. I thought I was a freak. But as the fog of panic evaporated from my mind, a shocking, radiant truth settled into my bones. Marvin was the failure. Marvin was the miserable, hollow shell trying to act tough, trying to pay rent, trying to exist in a body that felt wrong. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I reached up and carefully wiped away the remaining smudge mascara beneath my eyes. I sat up straighter, smoothing out the hem of the white sweater dress. The frantic, terrified boy who had run into this office an hour ago was gone. "You're right," I whispered, the pitch of my voice naturally softening, settling into its breathy resonance without any conscious effort. "He's gone. He's been gone for a long time." I stood up, adjusting my handbag over my shoulder. Marvin had officially died in the recesses of my mind. There was no more running, no more wishing for the rough, harsh existence of manhood. I am Miriam, and it was time to take my life back. I walked out of Dr. Evans's office feeling as though I had been surgically hollowed out and filled with something entirely new, absolute, terrifying clarity. For the next few weeks, I played my part flawlessly at Femme Fatale, designing pieces that brought in millions. I was no longer stumbling in heels, I was weaponizing them. But the 50% cut draining from my account every month was a rotting chain around my neck. Charlie still thought he owned me. He still thought I was Marvin, the desperate, spineless guy in the cheap apartment. I didn't realize he had accidentally created a woman who had nothing left to lose. I couldn't live a half-life anymore. I wouldn't be a puppet to a black market broker. It was time to burn the house down, even if I perished in the flames. On a brisk Thursday morning, I bypassed my design studio entirely and took the private executive elevator straight to the top floor. I wasn't shaking. My posture was impeccable. I had deliberately chosen my outfit to reflect absolute, unapologetic power. I wore a skin-tight, pitch-black catsuit made of a sleek, expensive jersey blend that clung to every newly developed curve of my body. Over it, I draped a luxurious, voluminous shearling coat, leaving it unbuttoned. My feet were encased in thigh-high black leather boots that snapped with lethal precision against the marble floor. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek ponytail. I looked like an assassin. I didn't knock. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to Victoria Hartley's office. Victoria was on a call, holding a gold pen. She looked up, her icy blue eyes narrowing in immediate annoyance at the intrusion. But I didn't stop. I walked straight up to her vast glass desk. I reached into my designer handbag. I didn't pull out fabric swatches or quarterly reports. I pulled out a thick, manila envelope and slammed it down onto the glass with a loud smack. Victoria slowly lowered her phone, ending the call without taking her eyes off me. "Miriam, I sincerely hope this is a matter of life and death, because interrupting me usually implies a death wish." "It is," I said, my voice steady, though beneath the sleek black jersey, a fine sheen of sweat covered my skin. I opened the envelope and tipped the contents onto her pristine desk. Out slid a stack of documents. My real birth certificate, my original, unaltered college transcripts, the financial records detailing the 50% wage garnishment to a shell corporation, and a USB drive containing recorded conversations proving extortion. I listed them off, my voice chillingly calm. Victoria's gaze dropped to the paperwork. She picked up the birth certificate, adjusting her reading glasses. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the cavernous office was the hum of the city traffic below. When she finally looked back up at me, the confusion in her eyes hardened into a cold, Dangerous fury. Marvin, she read the name off the paper, her voice barely a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut glass. I was a desperate man facing homelessness, I confessed. Standing tall, refusing to break eye contact. A black market recruiter named Charlie forged everything. The resume, the background, the identity. He provided the clothes, the hormones, the voice coaching. I lied to you. I infiltrated your company under false pretenses. I committed corporate fraud. Victoria stood up slowly. She was not a tall woman. But at that moment, she seemed to block out the sun. She paced around the edge of the glass desk, stopping just inches from me. Her eyes raked over my body, the thigh-high boots, the sleek black catsuit, the perfectly contoured makeup. She began, her voice vibrating with restrained rage, are telling me that my brilliant visionary lead creative director is a man. No, I replied instantly, the words snapping out of me with fierce conviction. I didn't shrink away. I didn't cry. I was born a man, I continued, my voice unwavering. But the person standing in front of you, the person who designed the spring collection that increased your Q3 margins by 40%, is Miriam. Charlie forced me into a dress to steal your money. But in doing so, he accidentally forced me to confront a truth I had buried my entire life. I am a woman, Victoria, but my presence here started as a lie. And I refused to be blackmailed any longer. I took a half step back, spreading my hands slightly. You can call security. You can have me arrested for fraud. You can ruin my life. I'm handing you the match. Burn me, if you want. Victoria Hartley stared at me. Her chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. The fury in her eyes was palpable, a violent storm threatening to unleash. But then, as the seconds ticked by, the storm didn't break. She turned on her heel, walked back to her chair, and sat down. She picked up the birth certificate and the forged HR documents, weighing them in her hands. The rage in her eyes slowly, incredibly, shifted into the cold, calculating glint of a ruthless capitalist. You stood before me 6 months ago, Victoria said softly, her tone entirely unreadable. You sat in that chair and gave me a poetic speech about armor, about strong silhouettes hiding fragile souls. She slapped the paperwork down on the desk. Was that a lie, too? Marvin. That, I said, my voice cracking slightly for the first time, was the most honest thing I have ever said in my entire life. Victoria leaned back, steepling her fingers. She looked at the woman standing before her, clad in a skin-tight catsuit and a shearling coat, sweating but unbowed. Femme fatale, Victoria stated clearly, does not hire men. Our board is notoriously strict on our female-only hiring initiative. My heart sank. I closed my eyes, preparing for the final blow. She's firing me. It's over. However, Victoria continued, a tiny predatory smile touching the corner of her lips, I am also not in the habit of firing my most profitable creative genius over a minor clerical error on a birth certificate. My eyes snapped open. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. I don't care if you started this journey for money, Miriam, Victoria said, leaning forward. You are standing in my office, owning your identity, possessing a talent that cannot be taught. You are a woman now. That is all that matters to me, and that is all that matters to Femme Fatale. She reached out and tapped the USB drive. My legal team will annihilate this Charlie character. He'll be tied up in so much extortion litigation he'll be lucky to see sunlight before the next decade. As for you, the company will cover your legal fees to officially, legally change your name and gender markers. We will provide full corporate health coverage for any further medical transitions you require. The breath rushed out of my lungs in a dizzying whoosh. I braced my hand against the edge of the glass desk to stop my knees from giving out. Victoria stood up again, her expression softening into something bordering on fierce pride. You don't belong to a black market scammer anymore, Miriam, she said, offering me a sharp, decisive nod. You belong to Femme Fatale. Now wipe that shocked look off your face and get back to your studio. You have a winter line to finalize. I couldn't speak. The sheer magnitude of the pardon, the absolute validation of my existence, overwhelmed me. I nodded frantically, a massive, brilliant smile breaking across my face. I turned and walked out of the office, the thigh-high boots clicking triumphantly against the marble. I wasn't just safe, I was free. 3 months later, the city was alive with the manic, sparkling energy that always preceded a major fashion debut. It was the night of the Femme Fatale winter collection premiere. My collection, Miriam's collection. The chaos backstage was a beautiful, orchestrated symphony of hairspray, shouting models, and frantic wardrobe adjustments. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding in the shadows, orchestrating the event through a veil of anxiety. I was the center of it, the director, the heart. I stood before a brightly lit vanity mirror in my private dressing room, finalizing my own look for the runway bow. The transformation from Marvin to Miriam was complete, not just legally and hormonally, but spiritually. There was no remaining shred of the terrified, stumbling man who had awkwardly shoved himself into a scratchy dress. Tonight, there was no costume. There was only me. I was wearing a breathtaking, custom-designed evening gown in a rich, profound emerald green, a subtle, deeply personal homage to the satin slip of my childhood. The fabric was a heavy, liquid silk that cascaded down my body, pooling elegantly at my feet. It featured a daring, plunging back that scooped dramatically down to my natural waist. The sheer sequin-dusted fabric catching the vanity lights and shimmering like a constellation. The front was sleek and understated, featuring a high, elegant boat neckline that highlighted my collarbones. I traced my fingers over the emerald silk. My body beneath it was undeniably mine. The hormone therapy had fully softened my contours, rounding my hips and settling a profound, natural tenderness into my chest. The agonizing friction of my past was gone. Every movement I made was fluid, an effortless grace that resonated deep within my bones. 5 minutes to finale, Miriam and an assistant called through the cracked door. "I'm ready," I called back, my voice resonant, melodic, and entirely natural. I stepped into a pair of impossibly sharp, silver stiletto heels. There was no hesitation, no wobbling fear of twisting an ankle. I walked out of the dressing room, the emerald silk flowing around me like water, the heels clicking a steady, powerful rhythm against the concrete floor backstage. Every step was a testament to survival, an assertion of my hard-won womanhood. I took my position behind the massive LED screens as the final model, swathed in white faux fur, completed her walk. The applause in the venue swelled into a deafening roar. Victoria Hartley's voice echoed over the PA system. And now, the visionary behind tonight's triumph, our lead creative director, Miriam. The screens parted, the blinding glare of hundreds of camera flashes and spotlights hit me instantly. I walked out onto the glossy white runway. The emerald gown flared out gently as I moved. I didn't rush. I didn't cower. I walked to the end of the catwalk, placing one silver-heeled foot confidently in front of the other. The heavy silk draped perfectly over my curves. I stood at the edge, bathing in the thunderous applause, the adoring cheers of critics and buyers. I raised my hand, offering a gracious, radiant wave. A genuine smile, broad and unrestrained, split my face. This wasn't the terrified grin of a man trying not to be discovered. This was the triumphant joy of a woman standing exactly where she belonged. Hours later, the after-party was winding down. The champagne was running low, and the elite crowd had begun to disperse. I slipped away quietly, needing a moment to breathe. I walked out of the opulent event hall and onto the quiet, late-night city street. The air was crisp and biting, but the heavy emerald silk insulated me surprisingly well. The sky above the skyscrapers was clear, dusted with tiny bright stars. I reached into my small silver clutch and pulled out a large pair of tortoise-shell sunglasses, the very same pair Charlie had shoved onto my face on that first terrifying day, telling me to hide. I had carried them for months like a security blanket, a remnant of the disguise I once thought I needed. I held them up, looking through the dark lenses at the streetlights. They were smudged, scratched, and completely unnecessary. I walked over to a nearby trash can and casually tossed them in. I closed my eyes and tilted my head back. The cool night wind brushed against my neck, sending a delicious, affirming shiver down my spine. The heavy emerald silk fluttered gently against my legs. My breasts ached slightly from the long evening, a constant, beautiful reminder of the woman I had become. My journey hadn't ended because the world suddenly accepted me. It ended because I finally found the courage to accept myself. Marvin had died, not violently, but quietly fading away, leaving behind the stunning, undeniable reality of his true soul. I opened my eyes, the city lights reflecting in my dark makeup. I took a deep, clear breath. There were no more lies, no more black market pills, no more fear. There was only Miriam, a woman, brilliant, fierce, and utterly, magnificently free. I turned on my silver heel and walked away into the vibrant, beautiful night.